Beatles are an icon that haven't been forgotten, and never will be. They changed the face for the music world, leaving such an impact that their achievements are a goal for musical acts around the globe. These four British boys, Paul, John, Ringo, and George, not only influenced other artists with the music they made, they wrote songs that inspired musicians from every genre. From the beginning, a wide variety of artists were covering the band's songs. Since the band broke up in 1970, the influence of the Beatles has only gotten bigger, and there are only a few groups that have achieved such immediate cultural impact as this group. During the 1960s and 70s, many soul artists found themselves covering songs that were recent hits for the Beatles, often scoring hits of their own. Examples of the musicians that covered the Beatles songs would be Elvis Presley singing Hey Jude, Ozzy Osbourne singing In My Life, Bob Dylan singing Things We Said Today, Billy Joel singing Maybe I'm Amazed, and Willie Nelson singing Yesterday. John Lennon was the one to start the band. He had a band of his own, whom he called the Quarrymen. He and his band performed at many small events, and it just so happens that one of them was what started the Beatles. The event on July 6, 1957, in the Garden Fete of St. Peter's Church in Woolton, Liverpool. Paul met John Lennon after the Quarrymen had performed, and taught Lennon his way to tune a guitar and even sung a little bit. 2 weeks later, Lennon made the decision to ask Paul McCartney to join his band. Paul accepted, and that was the beginning of the Beatles. After Paul joined, George Harrison was introduced to the band on February 6, 1958, after the Quarrymen had performed. The last member to join was Ringo Starr, who was introduced to the band in Hamburg, Germany in 1960. At the time, Ringo was performing with his own band, Rory Storm and the Hurricanes. After he met the band, he took the spot as the alternate drummer. When Peter Best wasn't able to perform, Ringo would. But on August 16, 1962, Peter was fired and Ringo took over permanently. The Beatles went through many different changes of their name. The last recorded time that the Beatles were called the Quarrymen was October 10, 1959. The next recorded name was Johnny and the Moondogs, which was recorded on October 18, 1959. The next name established was the Silver Beats. This name was recorded on May 14, 1960. Finally, on June 4, 1960, the band settled on the Beatles.
The next step in the Beatles' establishment was hiring their manager, Brian Epstein. In 1961, Brian first saw the Beatles. He thought they had potential, but it wasn't until 1962 when he signed out with them that Brian saw a bright future for the Beatles. He decided to allow the Beatles to truly stand out by giving them the same bowl haircuts and matching suits.
On January 1st of 1962, the Beatles recorded their first 15 songs for Decca Records, but didn't get hired. The songs only helped them in the long run.
After their first recording, the Beatles went all around London giving demos to record companies. They were rejected by big-time labels such as Columbia, Philips, Oriole, and Pye. On June 6, 1962, Abbey Road Studios accepted the Beatles' demo CD. On September 1962, the Beatles recorded their first hit, Love Me Do. The song charted in the UK and hit number 1 on the US charts. The Beatles then recorded their first album, Please Please Me, on February 11, 1963. It was a 10-hour recording process.
After the Beatles' first album was released, they went on tour with Ray Orbison for May and June. The next big step was when the Beatles recorded the single, She Loves You, which became a super hit. That single is what led the band to perform at the London Palladium. The London Palladium is the venue to which all performers aspire and has hosted more annual Royal Variety performances than any other theater. When the Beatles performed at the London Palladium, it was broadcasted to over 12 million people. This is where Beatlemania was born. The Beatles performed for charity concerts and other concerts here and there, but there were no tours of their own until February 1964. The Beatles started their first tour in the U.S. on February 9th of that year. On this day, they gave performance at the Ed Sullivan Show in New York, New York.
The Beatles!
73 million people tuned in to watch the Beatles' U.S. debut, and this performance was the stepping stone to their major success. The Beatles also decided to produce movies, which increased their popularity substantially. Their first film was A Hard Day's Night. It was made in 1964 and was followed by Help in 1965, and their animated film, Yellow Submarine. Feeding off of their success, the Beatles had their second tour, the Magical Mystery Tour, in 1967. This tour is what caused major criticism for the British press. The next step was on June 25, 1967, where the Beatles made history. They were the first band to be globally transmitted on TV to over 400 million people. Their big achievement was soon put to halt when 2 months later, the Beatles' beloved manager, Brian Epstein, passed away.
The loss of Brian struck the Beatles so sudden. John Lennon quoted, "This is the beginning of the end." Lennon's quotation was unfortunately true, along with a few times almost costing the Beatles their career, the most common on occurring in 1966 when Lennon made the quote, "We're more popular than Jesus Christ." After many apologies, Lennon's comment was water over the bridge. After numerous times of saying the wrong things or doing the wrong things merely by mistake, one thought sent the Beatles over the edge. They all had the same ambitions of individual careers.
These thoughts were in the back of all the Beatles' minds, but weren't fully progressed until April 10, 1970, when Paul McCartney announced his departure. The news shook the world. Shortly after, the Beatles turned and all went down their own path. It may have been the departure of Paul, or it could have been the passing of Brian Epstein, but whatever the reason was, the Beatles turned to making a career of their own. The announcement of the Beatles splitting opened the eyes to many. Not only did people realize that the Beatles were no longer the four boys they started as, they realized that their impact was greater than any other left by a band. The Beatles started the look that every boy band of the 20th century wanted to have. Their clean bowl haircuts and matching suits were only the start, though. Every music critic and everyday folks compared the boy bands of today to the Beatles. The Beatles seemed to rewrite the standards for boy bands worldwide.
Former Rolling Stone associate editor Robert Greenfield compared the Beatles to Picasso as artists who broke through the constraints of their time period to come up with something that was unique and original. In the form of popular music, no one will ever be more revolutionary, more creative, and more distinctive. They not only sparked the British invasion of the U.S., they became a globally influential phenomenon as well.
On radio, their arrival marked the beginning of a new era. Program director Rick Sklar of New York's WABC went so far as to forbid his DJs from playing any pre-Beatles music. They helped to redefine the standards as something more than just a few hits padded out with filler, and they were primary innovators of the modern music video. The Shea Stadium show with which they opened their 1965 North American tour attracted an estimated 55,600 people. Spitz describes the event as a major breakthrough, a giant step towards reshaping the concert business. Emulation of their clothing and especially their hairstyles, which became a mark of rebellion, had a global impact on fashion as well. The Beatles changed the way people listened to popular music and experienced its role in their lives. From what began as the Beatlemania fad, the group's popularity grew into what was seen as an embodiment of socio-cultural movements of the decade. As icons of the 1960s counterculture, they became a catalyst for bohemianism and activism in various social and political areas, fueling movements such as women's liberation, gay liberation, and environmentalism. After the more popular than Jesus controversy in 1966, the Beatles felt considerable pressure to say the right things and began a concerted effort to spread a message of wisdom and higher consciousness. We recently came in contact with several living Beatles fans. We asked them many questions. The questions and answers will be quoted momentarily. How would you describe the Beatlemania hysteria?
It was very dramatic. It seemed to start out of nowhere, and that's basically it in a nutshell. It was a mania.
How would you describe your affection for the group?
Just kind of a wonderful feeling when I saw them perform, when I listened to their music. I can't describe it any better than that.
Would you say that at some point in time the Beatles consumed your life?
Nothing else before that or maybe after that came along that engaged my attention so completely. My next door neighbor, a 45 record RPM of both sides being the Beatles, and every evening when we had our so-called noisy hours in the dorms, when we were allowed to make some noise and be out in the halls, I would get that record from her, lie on the floor of my dorm room, put my legs up on the wall, and just play each side over and over and over again for about an hour.
In retrospect, the Beatles' achievement was a major success for them and the music world. The group paved the road for musical acts of today and to come. They inspired so many musicians and everyday folks of the past and the present. The Beatles are true leaders of the music industry and shocked the world with their long-lived fame that is still thriving today. The legacy that they left behind will never be forgotten, and most importantly, the leadership that they continue to possess will lead the way for music today, music in the future, and music forever.